And hello, everybody, and welcome to Narrative on a Tuesday evening, a breaking news Tuesday evening. It's good to be with you tonight as we prepare for the first phase in Stephen Bannon's declaration, or whatever it will be, that he's in contempt of Congress. Hi, Heidi Kuda. How are you? Oh, I can't hear you. Why can't I hear you? You're muted, probably.
I am muted. Yeah, I am unmuted.
And you're
now.
unmuted right now. We are just rolling into the show as we always do, with a lot of thunder, because we were trying to set up the live feed and try and talk to our amazing guests tonight, who will join us in just a few minutes. Rachel Bitecofer, who's a fantastic strategist, like one of the best strategists in the world. And the reason we invited her on tonight is because she's been the anti-red wave architect, and Stephen Bannon is sort of the red wave architect. So we thought we'd bring the anti-red wave architect here, and she'll be joining us in just a few minutes to give us her analysis. And later on, the very amazing Andrew Laufer, who you all know from Twitter, the civil rights attorney, will be joining us to give us analysis from 7:30 as the vote starts getting underway at the January 6th committee. He'll be giving us a blow-by-blow analysis. He's had a lot to say about this whole process and whether the committee is doing the right thing and the right processes in terms of finding Bannon in contempt. And so we'll get to all of that in just a bit. And tonight's show is Bannon, wall to wall, because there's no better villain than Stephen Bannon in the story of Trump-Russia when you really think about it. I mean, he's an understated villain. He's not the guy you'd actually expect to do very much. But I think behind the scenes, Stephen Bannon has pulled a lot of strings in the last few years, and certainly around January 6th. And we'll be unpacking some of his network, some of the people he may work with, or he does work with, some of the people he may work for, including perhaps China, and maybe Russia, maybe other countries around the world. So we'll get to that a little later on after we get to the starting block. Heidi, you'll be checking on people's messages, and hopefully they'll be making sure we don't make any mistakes along the way.
They're already being smartasses, Zev. They're like, what's the news today? There's no news.
I don't think there is any news, but we do have the starting block. Just imagine I have three faces on here, but I don't have three faces on here. You have two. The three faces I would be showing you if they were here would be Oleg Deripaska would be the first one. Who's the second?
Christopher Steele, the spy who came in from the cold.
And the third one?
Colin Powell, yes.
All right. So let's start with the big news of the day, which is Oleg Deripaska getting his homes raided both in New York and in Washington, D.C. We're not quite sure why, although I would hazard a guess that it has something to do with 2016. Not only is Oleg Deripaska one of the biggest central figures in everything that happened with Trump-Russia in 2016, he's also tied to a couple of other scandals which have followed from 2016, which include all sorts of corruption in our political circles. And, Oleg Deripaska is pretty prone to this. It's not the first time he's found himself maybe buying off a politician or two. He's done it in the UK for his master, Vladimir Putin. There's no reason why he wouldn't do the same thing here in the United States.
Yeah, it's apparently related to U.S. sanctions. And when you look at the things that he was sanctioned for, he's not super nice. Racketeering and money laundering, possibly trying to kill somebody. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. If it is about the U.S. sanctions, then it has a lot to do with maybe Mitch McConnell's, sudden discovery of an aluminium plant in Kentucky, because that's what Deripaska gave him in exchange for the dropping of sanctions. It'll be really interesting to see where this unfolds. It does seem to be involving some sort of buying of a politician. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll keep you informed as that story develops. There's a great story on narrative.org about Deripaska from 2019. If you want to learn about him, it's one of my favorites from narrative.org. So check that out. Just search Deripaska. Also in the news today, and it's not unrelated, is Christopher Steele finally breaking his silence.
That's right. He told George Stephanopoulos that he stands by everything that was in the dossier. He believes Trump is still a threat. He believes that Russia is still targeting our country. And he also believes that there's a possibility that the compromat take on Trump does actually exist.
Yes. I wonder who has it. I wonder if Stephen Bannon has it. Some people speculate that he might. It's really interesting that Christopher Steele comes out and does this interview with George Stephanopoulos just a day before the Deripaska raids, because they aren't disconnected at all. There is a lot of credence to the evidence that Steele actually worked for Deripaska for a period of time when he was trying to get his visa, Deripaska's visa, approved to come to the United States, and it was in negotiation with the FBI. It was Christopher Steele who negotiated on his behalf. So he certainly knows who Oleg Deripaska is, and he certainly knows what his intentions are. It's interesting that these two things just followed day after each other. I mean, it could be coincidence, but we know that doesn't happen anymore in the real world.
Yeah. And one thing we do know that Bannon is a leaker.
Yeah. Oh, he's a leaker. Very good. Very good. Actually, that's the best joke I've heard about P-tape in a long time. So thank you very much. Well done. You made my day, and I needed that joke. And finally, we said goodbye to Colin Powell. What a truly great man. And anyone else out there who's saying that, has questions still about what that man did in the Iraq War, sure, there's a lot to question about what happened back then. I think in the years since then, he's made up for all of that and then some, and shown us what real leadership is all about. He'll be missed. But however, there was a last interview that he had something to say about Donald Trump. Tell us about this.
Yes, we don't grade people on an average. And this man is really an incredible man, broke so many barriers. But the one gift that Colin Powell gave us that I think is really quite beautiful is his final interview with Bob Woodward. He basically said that Trump was on his way to the Capitol to overturn, the election and to threaten our government. And so that is on the record from Colin Powell, and we thank him for that.
Yes, and that ties in with the big news of the day. And Colin Powell will be missed as a great general and a great Secretary of State, but also someone that we'll keep in our minds as we think about what leadership looks like in the future United States. So let's move to the big story of the day. Let's get into Mr. Steve Bannon and what's going on in the January 6th committee. That's where right now they are beginning to assemble. I see empty chairs right now, but there will be filled chairs by the time we get to the 7:30. And this January 6th committee is going to determine whether they are going to find Mr. Bannon in contempt. Then it goes from there. It doesn't quite end there. Tonight they have the vote on holding Bannon in contempt. That's just the committee. Once the committee decides, then they should go to the full House. That'll be in a matter of days. Could be a little less, but it'll be probably in a few days. There'll be a full House vote on whether they find him in contempt. Then it goes to the Department of Justice, where it will be investigated, and maybe they'll have charges. Maybe they won't. They're not under no obligation to charge Bannon, although it certainly, if it comes as a recommendation from the committee, then it certainly looks likely that they will do something, or at least impanel a grand jury. So on that note, let me welcome Rachel Bitecofer to the show. I've been looking forward to having you on the show for so long, and it's finally nice to finally meet you. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Well, we did have that exciting near miss.
Yes. Well, it's great you're here, and I can see you, so that's amazing. Rachel, what's your take on what's going on today? I mean, why don't you tell people who you are first? Tell everyone about how amazing you are as a strategist.
I like to go in 007, though.
I'll play Moneypenny.
I'm a recovering academic,
Mm-hmm. Oh, one of those. We know those.
I made the career-killing mistake of telling the truth without tenure, So, and now I am I actually spent a brief tenure too as an election analyst type, but I am now using all of my professorial and analytical skills to try to help Democrats improve electioneering. I mean, it's a lot focused on messaging, taking us away from old school mobilization, persuasion, dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy, and moving into a GOP style brand centered, warfare style electioneering system. So it's quite an exciting time to be me. It is true that Steve Bannon's trying to bring a red wave that I'm trying to stop, but I think that's kind of the more sporty way to put it. Bannon is trying to bring a global decline of democracy. And at least here in America, partially me and other committed people are trying to stop it. So I think that's really the important way to frame what's happening between Bannon and I, and why I'm excited to talk about the pig pen of the fascist movement.
Oh, Zev, I can't hear you. You're muted right now.
There you go. Hi, I'm there. I've been talking all along, but enjoying your conversation nevertheless. So why are the Democrats so bad at this? It's not even a secret. It's everybody knows. They just can't seem to message, even when they have an upper hand, like it seems they've had in the last couple of years. What's going on? Are they just too well-meaning or too conciliatory, or don't they have a fight in them? What's going on with the Democrats?
It's really important to understand, actually, that it is that. I mean, it is that, because so much so, what has happened to the Republican Party now is flowing bottom up in a lot of ways. But prior to that, it was programmed in top down, right? And it tapped into elements of conservatism and that worldview on the right side of the aisle, authoritarian kind of strict parent model stuff it tapped into things that were like latent and predisposed to those kind of personalities. With us, because we are more nuanced intellectual thinkers who like to see the good in people, where we all hear John Lennon's Imagine and we cry, right?
I do all the time. You pegged me right.
So it's our very like innateness to idealism that hurts us so profoundly in terms of electioneering, because in order to electioneer effectively in the electorate that the Republican media ecosystem writ large, and that really is a double whammy between what they do in media and what they do in their electioneering space. Like, in order for us to combat that, we have to accept some hard truths about the American voter. They aren't policy motivated unless it's delivered to them in an emotive, fearful, over-the-top rhetorical way. They aren't well read in terms of current events. They don't understand how the government functions, so they're very imagistic and therefore very malleable and marketable via fear and negative emotion. So, those are hard pills to swallow. A lot of our research, we spend a shit ton on R&D, but a lot of it is about confirmation bias. So if you're not asking the right research questions, you can get data all day to support your preconceived notions. So
I get they're not into policy. I get that. Who's into policy? Nobody. But the fact that they're into authoritarianism is really surprising. I mean, that seems to be like a real jump for any American to go down that route. And yet there they are, like eagerly awaiting an authoritarian state and eagerly awaiting a white nationalist state. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, it just doesn't seem like what they, either we were sold the wrong bill of goods about what America was in the first place, or they've been sold a bill of goods. Which one is it? Number one or number two?
Stuart Stevens, who ran 5 Republican presidential campaigns, would tell you winner, chicken dinner on that, buddy, because, and his book, which I suggest everyone read, It's All a Lie, because this is a man that came to terms. Like, it's not like the Republican Party was this thing and then it became something else, okay? Mm-hmm. It was always a lie. And so the reason that now authoritarianism and nationalism has hit this early fascist Italy, early fascist Germany scene is because one of our key value has been white supremacy, and not just white supremacy, but white male dominance. And now we are moving, not just in America, but in this is every good democracy shares same thing. We're moving into a post white dominance, white male dominance world. I call it egalitarian.
Egalitarian, yes.
Kids, even professors
hard word
stuff, right?
Yeah,
egalitarian era, right? And why? So when you ask, why are we seeing democracy challenged in many places, not just here? And why is Bannon's effort global and not just here? It's because this white hegemony, which has been in place, I mean, people think forever, but actually the truth is white European dominance is kind of, the 1400s on or the 1200s on, right? But it's a long time structural thing that's being challenged now for the first time. And it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to, end segregation, make equality between men and women and racial minorities. But now we're 50 years in. So that equality is actually getting implemented. That power dominance is actually being challenged in meaningful ways. And that's what it makes the population very susceptible to what Bannon is designing intentionally and delivering. And he's got many allies and partners in that. He's certainly not alone, but we should.
I mean, it's so fascinating to me that he's, this whole let's talk about this, the attack on the school boards. This. I mean, it seems like terrorism. It just seems like terrorism. It feels like they're going after these nice parents in their nice schools and attacking them. I mean, it's when you turn children into your targets, it just seems, it seems unconscionable. Yet somehow that's going to work for them.
Well, guess where the Nazis started?
Did they? They started school boards.
First place they started is in the schools. And guys, let me explain what Bannon's strategy is, because I think I sent this out. Trump is dumb, right? But the Stephen Miller, Bannon, Roger Stone, and that crew, they've been very strategic and intentional about what they're doing. And if you've studied the rise of fascism, or people, I don't think people understand, the Nazi party was non-existent, had no political power. It tried a violent overthrow that was a total joke. and then it endeavored, while Hitler was in jail for 5 years, to turn itself into a legitimate political party, and within 10 years controlled the whole country, right?
Yeah.
How did they do it? They started in by going after the schools, getting a vocal minority to attack the school boards, attack like the curriculum, and then take over the curriculum and turn it into their party propaganda. So, it's not like it's organic. And my point is, it looks organic, but it's like a lot of things on the right. It's part of a strategy to lay the groundwork for bigger things.
And it's also, they used the Vatican, they used the elite of Germany. I mean, they had a lot of support from other places, not just, it looks like a grassroots movement, but it isn't a grassroots movement is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got, we know this about Nazi Germany. We know that happened there. Why can't we just stop it from happening here? Why is it so hard for us to stop it?
Well, because of the same reason it was hard to stop there. Because by the time the threat becomes obvious to the average person, it's far too far down the road, right?
Right.
So, what we are trying to do, me, the Never Trump people who are on the pro-democracy bandwagon, some elements of partisan Democrats who are able to see the forest for the trees, because obviously Democrats have power in Washington right now, and
So
that makes them focus on policy, right? Because you want to use, so it's kind of sidetracking from the democratic crisis, right? And the Never Trumpers don't have anything else to focus on, right? So it's not like they have a purer heart. It's just that that's what they're focused on. Yeah, but so it's about me and others trying to get our half of the electorate to understand we have a 5-alarm fire, a 5-alarm fire. Right now.
6-alarm fire, whatever you have, 10-alarm fire.
But you don't go into a 7-Eleven or Starbucks, because you want someone college educated, so you at least get a philosophy major, right?
Yeah.
And mention to them that we're on the brink of democratic collapse, which I do every time I interact with regular folks, because that focus group, regular people all the time. They don't know that. They're always like, wow, it's that bad? I'm like, oh, yeah, no.
Why don't they know it? We've all been yelling it for years. I mean, I've been sitting here on this show for years yelling at people. Everyone's been yelling at them for years. Why don't people realize how serious this is?
I think there's a few things. One question that viewers have is, how did Democrats take the gloves off? There's a sentiment that the GOP's gone full amoral, and the Democrats still have empathy and care. So how do they actually take the gloves off and fight this war is one of the questions.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody watching this, if they haven't seen our collection of videos, the YouTube page doesn't include all the people who've seen it, right? Because it's had pretty good play. But I would highly recommend you watch our launch video, which is called Fuse, and it shows how to make the case about democracy being on the ballot. 22, the reason the midterms everyone's so pessimistic about it as a political scientist is, I can promise you the midterm fundamental is really rough, right? But what makes it rough is that we, especially on this side, never shape our own media narratives. We don't manipulate media coverage the way that the right does. I mean, they've built their own machine to do it now, but even within that, they still manipulate the media narrative. We don't do that. So when we think about how do you get around a midterm effect, you have to be pounding the other side, because they're going to pound you. And that's really the GOP's playbook, right? They never run on policy. They run against us, right? They basically win elections by disqualifying us. And so when you ask me specifically, how do you take the gloves off? I'm here to tell you, it's not some hypothesis. I can show you how to do this. Go to the YouTube page and see how do you weaponize this branding, framing, attack shit that they pull out on us that's hyperbolic. The nice thing is we don't have to make shit up, because they're so nuts, right? So it's all truthful, right? But it's hyperbolic, because we got to make ads that talk to people in the gut. People's heads, they don't know shit.
Right.
You can't talk to them in the gut. So, so I would say to them, there's a way to do it. And we're showing people how.
One other thing, I unblocked Mitch McConnell for the first time today on Twitter because of the Deripaska thing. Yes, I did.
Yeah,
and to your point,
McConnell tears, right?
To your point, every single tweet of his started Democrats are, like it was some sort of Mad Libs, and they pound that negative messaging, and there's something to learn there. Another question the viewers have is they want to know if this red pushback that we see in the media is actually smaller than it appears. They also want to know if it's organic. I think we've already answered that, or if it's like Koch funded by, dark money, essentially.
So can you remind me the first question that you asked again?
Sure. Yeah. They want to know if what they see in the news is all of this crazy happening at school boards and craziness about homeschooling. And they want to know if the red pushback is smaller than we think. If it's not as, okay, great. Yeah. What can you tell them about that and where you think it actually stems from, if it's organic or not organic?
Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing, like, usually when you've got like one side's partisans showing up and yelling at, public meetings, that's like a sign of enthusiasm, right? And I'm not just saying that these people, like these anti-mask aren't enthusiastic. It's just that we also saw like a good turnout at the Women's March, right? We're seeing good early voting in Virginia. We saw good turnout in the California recall, which are good. So these are things we now know, hard data, not polls, that we didn't have before to look back and kind of analytically assess. So in terms of, is it a real movement? Yeah, it is. Okay. But it's also a fake movement, because I can guarantee you, if, let's say, Hillary Clinton had been president, or anybody, like any other, maybe not a Democrat, like Rubio, and this pandemic had come in and he's sane, so he would not have ever turned the pandemic into this weird, crazy partisan issue. The people are crazy about the pandemic because the GOP's media system, influencer network, and its politicians told them to be, right? Yeah. I know for sure that is a top-down effect. There's always some vaccine nuts, but what we're seeing in this vaccine rejection, and I started telling people this was coming way before the vaccines were released, when I saw the coverage and Trump's response, that what we're seeing here is basically a weaponization, a symbolization, right? And like a vocal minority can be very distorting. So like when we think about like the NRA, like that, when they're agitated, it can look very distorting. And they've been very agitated here in Virginia since the Democrats actually made some modest common sense gun reform. I mean, nothing crazy, just saying, maybe wife beaters shouldn't have guns. So like when we get the election results in a couple of weeks, we're going to find out, like, did all these rallies and all the shit that they were doing matter? But or not, right?
What is it when you say like a GOP messaging? Give us an example of what that might look like compared to what the Democrats do now.
Yeah, sure. I was talking to a reporter today, like Financial Times article. He asked me like, "Oh, what do you mean by like how, like," because I was like, listen, the reason that the press is able to set this narrative about the dollar figure for the Build Back Better reconciliation bill is because the Democrats don't do a coordinated talking point. Everyone's pounding it. Like, hey, sniper version of selling the bill, right? The GOP would pick one thing, either to run against or to run for, and they would make that the symbol of the whole legislation. And even if it did a piss poor job of representing the legislation, they would still do it because they understand cerebrally the average voter can't hold on to nuance and complexity. They'll tune it out as soon as it starts coming at them. They need simplicity. And so like you would run on, hey, we're passing the biggest middle-class tax cut in decades, and the Republicans are blocking it, right?
Yes.
And then you would just pound that. Like, why do Republicans support every tax cut except for the one that goes to you, American middle class, right? And if you just made that stand out in front of all the, like, there's a bunch of great shit. Our impulse is, we got to tell everybody about all the great shit.
Yeah. No one gets excited about broadband. I mean, it's interesting.
No shit. And the reason we want to do that is because we think everyone's like us. And if everyone was like us, yes, they would need to know about all the good shit, but then we wouldn't need to tell them because they'd already know and they'd already vote. But you know what I mean?
Childcare is a good one. Everyone understands childcare. Much better than broadband.
If this was reversed, right? And like they would just murder us on voting against this thing.
Of course.
It wouldn't. It doesn't matter if, like, the way that the thing came to the middle class was by sacrificial demon sacrifices of infants in a altar, right? They
Yeah.
would still eviscerate us for voting
Yeah.
against us. So that's all we got to do. Like, we already know exactly what we got to do. We already have a team in place, myself included on this team, that can articulate this shit into like executable product, and we just got to get it into field.
Right. So there's potentially childcare and they're fascists. So you know, not only do they want to take away your child, there's a lot there to run on.
That's right. That's right. Well, I mean, there's a way to sell fascism, like the fear of it, right? Like when you got to make people feel it in their bones, right? Like, what will fascism mean to this, like, white suburban middle class mom, right? And like, how will it affect them economically? What's going to happen when it's their door that gets knocked?
Yeah.
Or
So-
like,
And just the naivety of it. I mean, I grew up in South Africa, so I have a good idea of what it's like to grow up in a fascist country, and it's awful in every regard. I mean, you have no sense of, you can't speak out, you don't trust your friends, you don't trust your neighbors, you don't know who's going to call the cops on you, you don't know who's going to, is someone going to tell someone at the school that your kid has been misbehaving? And
yeah, you bring that shit to life in a 30-second ad, right? With like some good Hollywood production budget behind it, because we that's our asset. They've got a propaganda network, and it's firing full tilt, and it goes now through local TV news, local newspapers. They bought it all up, right?
Yeah.
We got Hollywood, dude.
We've got Hollywood also. We've got real fear. I mean, that's something to be really scared of. It's really scary to think of.
I will make you ads that will freak people out.
Yeah.
Okay?
But we need that. We need that. We're not seeing it. It makes me nervous we're not seeing it, because.
But here's the thing, and like, for anybody who's watching this and thinking, well, I don't want to do that to people. The other side is doing that to other people. That's why they're coming for your democracy, because they've been told already, you're coming for theirs.
Right. It is all fear. I mean, there's everything the GOP stands for has been fear, but it's all just been ratcheting up the fear. So it's kind of sad we're here at this stage. Let's talk a little bit about Bannon's involvement in Jan 6 as this committee gets going here a little bit. We think of Bannon as sort of this kind of not really that involved strategist, but he really is kind of involved. He's more involved than we realize. Certainly the committee's looking at what he did on January the 5th, which is meet with a bunch of congressional leaders to try and convince them to stop the vote when they voted on the vote on the 6th. But he also said, quite tellingly, and everyone's been pointing to this one quote, that there'll be all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. I think he said on the War Room, that's his podcast, which is also, a tool for ratcheting up fear. Just even the name itself, the War Room, indicates that you're sitting there, ratcheting up some sort of conflict, even though there isn't one that's necessarily going on. But it also turns out that he was very involved in actually coming up with a whole strategy for what date to pick, when is the right moment to do this, and he came up with January 6th. And the biggest tell, I think, that people are missing is that on January, the three main players in January 6th, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Stephen Bannon, there's others, of course, but certainly these are your, three key ones. All three of these guys got pardoned by Donald Trump just before January 6th, at various times, but just before January 6th. The thinking seems to be that basically they were pardoned so they can go out and commit another crime in January the 6th. To me, that kind of pattern is really interesting, because it does take us back to Donald Trump's involvement in that day. The idea that he might have been the central figure involved in pardoning these three in order to then have them commit another crime actually involves him quite directly in this crime. Many people are telling me that it's going to be Bannon who is scapegoated in this whole event, that it's not going to be anywhere near Donald Trump or get up to that level, but we could see someone like Bannon scapegoated. Do you think that'll be enough if someone like Bannon gets thrown in jail? Would that be enough to satisfy the hunger of Democrats?
I mean, I don't know about that, but I know it's not enough to satisfy the rule of law, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, here's what we know. Number one, and this is always important to stress, January 6th is a capstone event in a series of events designed to stage an illegal coup and steal permanent power in the U.S. and democracy, right? Now, of course, like, we have more detail because the Eastman memo came out. And so, like, we're starting to see more of that. But we already know there was like an attempted coup at the Justice Department to find someone who would invalidate the election results. Bannon, Stone, and the others were all pardoned. Of course, Bannon was pardoned on midnight of January 19th, right before the impeachment. But I think it was to cover him retroactively for all of these conspiratorial plotting, right, to steal power. And they did it all in plain sight. I mean, we saw what we saw, right? So we know that Trump and Bannon and Roger Stone were all in contact. We know Roger Stone was in contact with these Proud Boys. We know for sure that Trump was involved with these men in some capacity on the planning and execution of January 6th. This is much more complicit and culpable activity from Trump than his words on the stage on that day, in my opinion. Oh, go to the Capitol and tell them you're pissed, right? That, you could argue, was inartfully worded, but he meant go outside and yell at them.
Yeah, there's an excuse for that. There's a way to get off that.
Yeah, that to me is not, is neither here nor there. It's the activities that he did, which included January 6th to seize power, that are much more, there's just so much that we can see in public view. And, Eastman memo was something we didn't even know about until 2 weeks ago. So, obviously, there's a lot there. Now, to get all the way up to Trump, I do think it is going to be a hitch that he tended not to put anything in electronics. And for a dumb man, that's pretty smart. And he is dumb, right? So, I think that is a complicating factor.
I think Bannon put a lot in electronics. I think we'll see a lot from him. Thank you for spending your time with Narrative. And stay tuned. There's much more to this conversation in our next episode. Narrative is made possible by viewers and listeners like you who join at patreon.com/narrative. Join today and support truly independent journalism. Patreon.com/narrative.